The Chief Symbols, the fifth Bhakti Yoga class for beginners, delivered at 228 West 39th Street, New York, on Monday morning, 6 January 1896, and recorded by Mr. Josiah J. Goodwin. There are two Sanskrit words, pratika and pratima. Pratika means coming towards, nearing. In all countries, you find various grades of worship. In this country, for instance, there are people who worship images of saints. There are people who worship certain forms and symbols. Then there are people who worship different beings who are higher than men, and their number is increasing very rapidly. Worshippers of departed spirits. I read that there are something like 8 million of them here. Then there are other people who worship certain beings of a higher grade, angels, gods, and so forth. Bhakti Yoga does not condemn any one of these various grades, but they are all classed under one name, Pratika. These people are not worshipping God, but a Pratika, something which is near, a step towards God. This Pratika worship cannot lead us to salvation and freedom. It can only give us certain particular things for which we worship them. For instance, if a man worships his departed ancestors or departed friends, he may get certain powers or certain information from them. Any particular gift that is got from these objects of worship is called vidya, particular knowledge. But freedom, the highest aim, comes only by worship of God Himself. Some Orientalists think, in expounding the Vedas, that even the personal God Himself is a pratika. The personal God may be a pratika, but the pratikas are neither the personal nor impersonal God. They cannot be worshipped as God. So, it would be a great mistake if people thought that by worshipping these different pratikas, either as angels or ancestors or Mahatmas or departed spirits, they could ever reach to freedom. At best, they can only reach to certain powers. But God alone can make us free. But because of that, these are not to be condemned. Their worship produces some result. The man who does not understand anything higher may get some power, some enjoyment by the worship of these pratikas. And after a long course of experience, when he will be ready to come to freedom, he will of his own accord give up the pratikas. Of these various pratikas, the most prevalent form is the worship of departed friends. Human nature, personal love for our friends, is so strong in us that when they die, we wish to see them once more, clinging on to their forms. We forget that these forms, while living, were constantly changing. And when they die, we think they become constant, and that we shall see them so. Not only so, but if I have a friend or a son who has been a scoundrel, as soon as he dies, I begin to think he is the saintliest person in existence. He becomes a god. There are people in India who, if a baby dies, do not burn it, but bury it and build a temple over it. And that little baby becomes the god of that temple. This is a very prevalent form of religion in many countries, and there are not wanting philosophers who think this has been the origin of all religions. Of course, they cannot prove it. We must remember, however, that this worship of pratikas can never bring us to salvation or to freedom. Secondly, it is very dangerous. The danger is that these pratikas, nearing stages, so far as they lead us on to a further stage, are all right. But the chances are 99 to 1 that we shall stick to the pratikas all our lives. It is very good to be born in a church But it is very bad to die there. To make it clearer, it is very good to be born in a certain sect and have its training. It brings out our higher qualities. But in the vast majority of cases, we die in that little sect. We never come out or grow. That is the great danger of all these worships of pratikas. One says that these are all the stages which one has to pass through, but one never gets out of them. And when one becomes old, one still sticks to them. If a young man does not go to church, he ought to be condemned. But if an old man goes to church, he also ought to be condemned. He has no business with this child's play anymore. The church should have been merely a preparation for something higher. What business has he anymore with forms and pratikas and all the preliminaries? Book worship is another strong form of this pratika, the strongest form. You find in every country that the book becomes the god. There are sects in my country who believe that God incarnates and becomes man. But even God incarnate as man must conform to the Vedas. And if his teachings do not so conform, they will not take him. Buddha is worshipped by the Hindus, but if you say to them, if you worship Buddha, why don't you take his teachings? They will say, because the Buddhists deny the Vedas. Such is the meaning of book worship. Any number of lies in the name of a religious book are all right. In India, if I want to teach anything new and simply state it on my own authority as what I think, nobody will come to listen to me. But if I take some passage from the Vedas and juggle with it and give it the most impossible meaning, murder everything that is reasonable in it, and bring out my own ideas as the ideas that were meant by the Vedas, all the fools will follow me in a crowd. Then there are men preaching a sort of Christianity that would frighten the ordinary Christian out of his wits, but they say, this is what Jesus Christ meant. And many come around them. People do not want anything new if it is not in the Vedas or the Bible. It is a case of nerves. When you hear a new and striking thing, you are startled. It is constitutional. It is much more so with thoughts. The mind has been running in ruts, and to take up a new idea is too much of a strain. So, the idea has to be put near the ruts, and then we slowly take it. It is a good policy, but bad morality. Think of the mass of incongruities that reformers and what you call the liberal preachers pour into society today. According to Christian scientists, Jesus was a great healer. According to the spiritualists, he was a great psychic. According to the theosophists, he was a Mahatma. All these have to be deduced from the same text. There is a text in the Vedas which says, existence, Sat, alone existed. O beloved, nothing else existed in the beginning. Many different meanings are given to the word Sat in this text. The atomists say the word meant atoms, and out of these atoms the world has been produced. The naturalists say it meant nature, and out of nature everything has come. The Shunyavadins say it meant nothing, zero, and out of nothing everything has been produced. The theists say it meant God, and the Advaitins say it was absolute existence. And all refer to the same text as their authority. These are the defects of book worship. But there is, on the other hand, a great advantage in it. It gives strength. All religious sects have disappeared except those that have a book. Nothing seems to kill them. Some of you have heard of the Parsis. They were the ancient Persians, and at one time there were about 100 million of them. The majority of them were conquered by the Arabs and converted to Islam. A handful fled from their persecutors with their book, which is still preserving them. A book is the most tangible form of God. Think of the Jews. If they had not had a book, they would have simply melted into the world. But that keeps them up. The Talmud keeps them together in spite of the most horrible persecution. One of the great advantages of a book is that it crystallizes everything in tangible and convenient form and is the handiest of all idols. Just put a book on an altar and everyone sees it. A good book, everybody reads. I am afraid I may be considered partial. But in my opinion, books have produced more evil than good. They are accountable for many mischievous doctrines. Creeds all come from books, and books are alone responsible for the persecution and fanaticism in the world. Books in modern times are making liars everywhere. I am astonished at the number of liars abroad in every country. The next thing to be considered is the pratima, or image, the use of images. All over the world, you will find images in some form or other. With some, it is in the form of a man, which is the best form. If I wanted to worship an image, I would rather have it in the form of a man than of an animal or building or any other form. One sect thinks a certain form is the right sort of image and another thinks it is bad. The Christian thinks that when God came in the form of a dove, it was all right. But if he comes in the form of a fish, as the Hindus say, it is very wrong and superstitious. The Jews think if an idol be made in the form of a chest with two angels sitting on it and a book on it, it is all right. But if it is in the form of a man or a woman, it is awful. The Muslims think that when they pray, if they try to form a mental image of the temple with the Kaaba, the black stone in it, and turn towards the west, it is all right. But if you form the image in the shape of a church, it is idolatry. This is the defect of image worship. Yet, all these seem to be necessary stages. In this matter, it is of supreme importance to think what we ourselves believe. What we have realized is the question. What Jesus or Buddha or Moses did is nothing to us unless we too do it for ourselves. It would not satisfy our hunger to shut ourselves up in a room and think of what Moses ate, nor would what Moses thought save us. My ideas are very radical on these points. Sometimes I think that I am right when I agree with all the ancient teachers. At other times, I think they are right when they agree with me. I believe in thinking independently. I believe in becoming entirely free from the holy teachers. Pay all reverence to them, but look at religion as an independent research. I have to find my light just as they found theirs. Their finding the light will not satisfy us at all. You have to become the Bible and not to follow it, except as paying reverence to it as a light on the way, as a guidepost, a mark. That is all the value it has. But these images and other things are quite necessary. You may try to concentrate your mind or even to project any thought. You will find that you naturally form images in your mind. You cannot help it. Two sorts of persons never require any image: the human animal who never thinks of any religion, and the perfected being who has passed through these stages. Between these 2 points, all of us require some sort of an ideal, outside and inside. It may be in the form of a departed human being or of a living man or woman. This is clinging to personality and bodies and is quite natural. We are prone to concretize. How could we be here if we did not concretize? We are concreted spirits, and so we find ourselves here on this earth. Concretization has brought us here, and it will take us out. It is the homeopathic cure. Similia similibus curantur. Going after things of the senses has made us human beings, and we are bound to worship personal beings, whatever we may say to the contrary. It is very easy to say, don't be personal. But the same man who says so is generally the most personal. His attachment for particular men and women is very strong. It does not leave him when they die. He wants to follow them beyond death. That is idolatry. It is the seed, the very cause of idolatry. And the cause being there, it will come out in some form. Is it not better to have a personal attachment to an image of Christ or Buddha than to an ordinary man or woman? In the West, people say that it is bad to kneel before images. But they can kneel before a woman and say, "You are my life, the light of my eyes, my soul." That is worse idolatry. What is this talk about my soul, my life? It will soon go away. It is only sense attachment. It is selfish love covered by a mass of flowers. Poets give it a good name and throw lavender water and all sorts of attractive things over it. Is it not better to kneel before a statue of Buddha or the Jinnah, the conqueror, and say, "Thou art my life"? I would rather do that. There is another sort of pratika which is not recognized in Western countries, but is taught in our books. This teaches the worship of the mind as God. Anything that is worshipped as God is a stage, a nearing, as it were. An example of this is the method of showing the fine star known as Arundhati, near the group Pleiades. One is shown a big star near to it, and when he has fixed his attention on this and has come to know it, he is shown a finer and still nearer star. And when he has fixed his attention to that, he is led up to Arundhati. So all these various pratikas and pratimas lead to God. The worship of Buddha and of Christ constitute a pratika, a drawing near to the worship of God. But this worship of Buddha and of Christ will not save a man. He must go beyond them to Him who manifested Himself as Buddha or as Jesus Christ, for God alone can give us freedom. There are even some philosophers who say these should be regarded as God. They are not pratikas but God Himself. However, we can take all these different pratikas, these different stages of approach, and not be hurt by them. But if we think while we are worshipping them that we are worshipping God, we are mistaken. If a man worships Jesus Christ and thinks he will be saved by that, he is mistaken entirely. If a man thinks that by worshipping an idol or the ghosts or spirits of the departed, he will be saved, he is entirely mistaken. We may worship anything by seeing God in it, if we can forget the idol and see God there. We must not project any image upon God, but we may fill any image with that life which is God. Only forget the image and you are right enough, for out of Him comes everything. He is everything. We may worship a picture as God, but not God as the picture. God in the picture is right, but the picture as God is wrong. God in the image is perfectly right. There is no danger there. This is the real worship of God. But the image God is a mere pratika. The next great thing to consider in bhakti is the word, the nama shakti, the power of the name. The whole universe is composed of name and form. Whatever we see is either a compound of name and form or simply name with form, which is a mental image. So, after all, there is nothing that is not name and form. We all believe God to be without form or shape, but as soon as we begin to think of Him, He acquires both name and form. The chitta is like the calm lake, thoughts being like waves upon this chitta. And name and form are the normal ways in which these waves arise. No wave can rise without name and form. The uniform cannot be thought of. It is beyond thought. As soon as it becomes thought and matter, it must have name and form. We cannot separate these. It is said in many books that God created the universe out of the word. Shabda Brahman in Sanskrit is the Christian theory of the word. An old Indian theory. It was taken to Alexandria by Indian preachers and was planted there. Thus, the idea of the Word and the Incarnation became fixed there. There is deep meaning in the thought that God created everything out of the Word. God Himself being formless, this is the best way to describe the projection of forms or the creation. The Sanskrit word for creation is srishti, projection. What is meant by God created things out of nothing? The universe is projected out of God. He becomes the universe, and it all returns to Him. And again it proceeds forth and again returns. Through all eternity, it will go on in that way. We have seen that the projection of anything in the mind cannot be without name and form. Suppose the mind to be perfectly calm, entirely without thought. Nevertheless, as soon as thought begins to rise, it will immediately take name and form. Every thought has a certain name and a certain form. In the same way, the very fact of creation, the very fact of projection, is eternally connected with name and form. Thus, we find that every idea that man has or can have must be connected with a certain name or word as its counterpart. This being so, it is quite natural to suppose that this universe is the outcome of mind, just as your body is the outcome of your idea. Your idea, as it were, made concrete and externalized. If it be true, moreover, that the whole universe is built on the same plan, then, if you know the manner in which one atom is built, you can understand how the whole universe is built. If it is true that in you the body forms the gross part outside and the mind forms the fine part inside, and both are eternally inseparable, then, when you cease to have the body, you will cease to have the mind also. When a man's brain is disturbed, his ideas also get disturbed because they are but one, the finer and the grosser parts. There are not two such things as matter and mind. As in a high column of air, there are dense and rarefied strata of one and the same element, air. So it is with the body. It is one thing throughout, layer on layer, from grosser to finer. Again, the body is like the fingernails. As these continue growing, even when they are cut, so from our subtle ideas grow body after body. The finer a thing, the more persistent it is. We find that always. The grosser it is, the less persistent. Thus, form is the grosser and name the finer state of a single manifesting power called thought. But these three are one. It is the unity and the Trinity, the three degrees of existence of the same thing, the finer, the more condensed, and the most condensed. Wherever the one is, the others are also. Wherever name is, there is form and thought. The world is homogeneous, and modern science shows beyond doubt that each atom is composed of the same material as the whole universe. If you know one lump of clay, you know the whole universe. Man is the most representative being in the universe, the microcosm, a small universe in himself. So in man we find there is the form, behind that the name, and behind that the thought, the thinking being. So this universe must be built on exactly the same plan. It naturally follows that if the universe is built upon the same plan as the body, the universe also must have the same divisions of form, name, and thought. The thought is the finest part of the universe, the real motive power. The thought behind our body is called soul, and the thought behind the universe is called God. Then, after that, is the name, and last of all is the form, which we see and feel. For instance, you are a particular person, a little universe within this universe, a body with a particular form. Then, behind that, a name, John or Jane, and behind that again, a thought. Similarly, there is this whole universe, and behind that is the name, what is called the Word in all religions. And behind that is God. The universal thought is Mahat, as the Sankhyas call it, universal consciousness. There must be some corresponding name. The question is, what is that name? According to the Hindus, that word is Om. The old Egyptians also believed that. The Katha Upanishad says, that seeking which a man practices brahmacharya, I will tell you in short. That is Om. This is Brahman, the immutable one, and this is the highest. Knowing this immutable one, whatever one desires, one gets. This Om stands for the name of the whole universe or God. Standing midway between the external world and God, it represents both. But then we can take the universal piecemeal according to the different senses, as touch, as color, as taste, and in various other ways. In each case, we can make of this universe millions of universes from different standpoints, each of which will be a complete universe by itself, and each one will have a name and a form and a thought behind. These thoughts behind are pratikas. Each of them has a name. These names are sacred symbols used in Bhakti Yoga. They have almost infinite power. Simply by repetition of these words, we can get anything we desire. We can come to perfection. But two things are necessary. The teacher must be wonderful, so also must be the taught, says the Katha Upanishad. Such a name must come from a person to whom it has descended through right succession. From master to disciple, the spiritual current has been coming from ancient times, bearing its power. The person from whom such a word comes is called a guru, and the person to whom it goes is called Shishya, the disciple. When the word has been received in the regular way, and when it has been repeated, much advance has been made in Bhakti Yoga. Simply by the repetition of that word will come even the highest state of bhakti. Thou hast so many names. Thou understandest what is meant by them. All these names are thine, and in each is thine infinite power. There is neither time nor place for repeating these names, for all times and places are holy. Thou art so easy, thou art so merciful. How unfortunate am I that I have no love for thee.
If you have enjoyed listening to these podcasts from Vedanta Works, please consider making a donation to our Vedanta Works podcast project GoFundMe campaign. Just open GoFundMe.com on your browser and search for Vedanta Works Podcast Project. All donations made in the USA are tax deductible through the Ramakrishna Foundation. All funds will be used to cover the cost of narration, editing, social media marketing, and podcast distribution. Thank you for your continued support.